called the Jack Kirby Collector, which is still going on. When Rand asked me to be on this panel, I jumped at the opportunity because I love all aspects of Kirby's work, not just superheroes, and I think this would be a lot of fun and enlightening to people who just think Kirby just does superheroes. So, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Tracy Kirby. I'm the granddaughter of Jack Kirby, and I have more of a personal take and experience, obviously, on all things Jack, and I can be here to contribute to kind of like more of like where a lot of the insight came from, you know, because I grew up literally spending more time with my grandparents than probably I did in my own house, living in Thousand Oaks, you know, the whole time. So anyway, so I'm glad to be here.
I'm Bruce Simon. I'm a cartoonist at the old underground school, and I met Jack and Roz back in 1969. And when Jack was involved with Marvel Media International, and I was good friends with Steve Sherman and Martha there, who were Jack's assistants for years. And I got to be a friend of the family and got to meet and talk with Jack many, many times. So I consider myself, you know, now we're like the people who shook the hand of the guy who shook the hand of Abraham Lincoln. So we're happy to share any personal stuff that we can conjure up.
I'm Sydney Heifler. I'm a romance comic historian. I found about Jack Kirby through romance comics when I was at community college, and now I'm doing my PhD and my dissertation on it. So I'm here to talk about romance comics.
Hello, I'm Tom Kraft. I'm the president of the Jack Kirby Museum. My focus with the museum is building their digital archive and cataloging all of Jack's work.
It's online. Where's booth 1800, 1804. I'm Mark Badger. I drew a bunch for Marvel in DC. I started reading Jack as a wee lad, I mean like 10, whatever. When you draw comics, you look at Jack to figure out how to draw superhero comics. I got recruited out of superhero comics, and as an adult started looking at Jack again and went, how can this stuff still be valid at 5, 10, 15, when you're that old, and then I'm 50, 60, and I'm a firm believer that 20th century, there's Picasso, there's Matisse, there's Jack. Enough said on the rest of the 20th century. Just write the rest of it out of history. That's all you need to talk about. And Rand's bringing the beer.
I'm bringing the beer. I'm Rand Hoppy. I am the director. I'm the director of the Jack Kirby Museum. It's really great to see everybody here. Sorry for the technical challenges. We've been Yay! Oh, it's my email. Great. Okay. So so Tom and I we submitted this panel to the Comic-Con people. We're so thankful to Comic-Con. They support us with our booth for the last few years, and it's just great to be able to have a panel. We are at 1804. Come and visit. Get T-shirts. Get prints. We have wonderful, wonderful things of Jack's there, and go to our YouTube channel. We've got hours and hours of video of Tom and I and other people like Mark and Bruce and Tracy and Cindy all talking on videos on YouTube. Right now we're in the middle of a Jack Kirby at Marvel in the 1970s, and we're just having a great time. We're looking at that pretty much every Monday night, but then we also do it on Wednesdays. check it out. Join our YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Smash that like button, take the notification. All right, so welcome panelists. Well, we don't have to do that anymore. There's Tracy and her grandparents and her brother. Sydney, so we can. I'm just going to go through these guys. I'm sorry, because we already did that. Okay, so Jack Kirby, but not all this stuff that Jack is known for. I'm just going to click through it. It's, these are the fourth world things at DC. Oh yeah, then there's all that Marvel stuff like the Hulk and Thor, and Jack Kirby and superheroes. He's like the king of comics. He's the king of comics. He's not necessarily the king of superhero comics. That's why we're here. We're going to talk about all the other stuff that he did, other than gods, science fiction, superheroes, cosmic stuff. So that is, oh yeah, Captain America with Joe Simon and all the other Marvel stuff with Stanley. So after his success, he and Joe Simon's success with Captain America at Marvel, at Timely with Goodman, they left and they went to DC National. And what did they do? They created Kid Gang.
Sure did.
They did, right?
Yeah.
So Tom went into the database and pulled out, some data that we have that, there are, 52 Boy Commando stories, 4 Boy Explorer stories, Dingbats of Danger Street, Jimmy Olsen. So Kid Gangs were really, something where they really made their oats. Boy Commandos was the number 3 seller after Superman and Batman at DC National in the 40s. And just to take a brief moment to look at this incredibly lucky piece of work that exists, which is Jack Kirby's Street Code. He very often, and we will get to his war comics, but if you met him in public, and in person, and eventually he would end up telling war stories. He had really incredible, horrible stories, experiences in World War II. Bruce, you got some World War II stories out of Jack at some point, right?
You couldn't spend much time with Jack without him talking about the war, which I think it turned out, the several times of your life that grow larger and larger and larger as you grow older. And the war was that for Jack.
Yeah.
But speaking to Kid Games, I mean, obviously Jack's upbringing made an enormous impact on him. The story is about growing up in the inner city in the late 20s and early 30s. Where it's not unlike what's going on, contemporary. Kids gang together to protect themselves. They become tribes and fight the next tribe on the next block. It's something that goes on forever. I think Jack took the experience of being in a kid gang where he literally had to fight for his existence every day and extrapolated it to the kid gangs, teaming up with superheroes in the comic books and making it, more palatable and using that experience. It's, you can see, that's this great double page spread. Can you go to one of the fight pages where these kids are like really savagely wailing at them? I mean, this is serious stuff. This isn't superhero, wham bam. This is like, I'm gonna kill you. So that was his day-to-day experience. So, I mean, this is that's how I feel, at least, the kid gangs developed from. So.
Yeah, I sometimes I'll say that Jack went through 2 meat grinders created by humanity, one being the Lower East Side and the other being the European theater in World War II. I mean, sometimes, some people would just go through one, but he went through 2. It had a great effect on him and his creativity and his perception on humans and civilization and our place in the cosmos and everything. I mean, it really, really had a big effect on him. And he did have his external life with the boys on the street, but he did have his kind of internal life, reading pulp magazines and,
turns back science and technology magazines and listening to the radio and reading comics. Yes.
I'm going to blab for a bit. There's a Bernice Abbott photo that is basically this scene. Bernice Abbott was a 30s and 40s photographer. And Jack took it, and has more impact than the photo, because this is Jack working with multiple perspectives, which is essentially the whole point of cubism, which is why I projected it. And if you put out the perspective lines on this, you'll see that all that space, this is something that Jack does over and over and over again. This is a masterpiece example of it, but it's a common thing to do to make space more interesting. And how Jack perceived and walked in space is the kind of thing you wish everybody would talk about. The other fact is, Jack's essentially swiping Renaissance art everywhere as he takes a really big picture and then he builds all these little stories going on it that are just isolated bits. You look at double baked spreads now and you go, oh look, there's a big head, snore. Oh, here's a bunch of superheroes standing here looking tough with a lot of airbrush rendering. Okay. Jack goes, I have a double page spread, I'm gonna blow your mind. I'm either gonna blow your mind with a galactic scene, or I'm gonna blow your mind with giving you all the stories of all the life that's going on in New York, where it's beyond reality of what's going on in New York. It's one of the fascinating, for us, we go to New York and it's really crowded. You look at Bernie's Abbott, any 30s and 40s photos. New York's kind of spacious, even in the ghetto, compared to what it is now. And Jack just crams it full of life, which is kind of what he does with everything.
My favorite detail in this whole thing is on the middle left, where there's a guy sitting against the steps of the brownstone. He's about the height and a half off, and the woman is emptying her garbage outside her tenement window. It's just right before it hits him in the head. So there are so many funny details in this thing. And all the time.
Well, you know what was funny too, is where this was in the house, was in a hallway between the kitchen and Jack's studio, and there would, a lot of times, there would always be, whether it was Jack or even Ross sometimes would actually stop, and as a kid, and even as I got older, there were so many of this art, so many of these pieces, you just would look at it and you'd always find something different. Like it never was something that you got used to going past all the time. So, and then there'd always be, oh, let me tell you the story about how I, drew the picture of the guy with a cigarette off on the left-hand corner, and and then that kind of turned into another story and another story. So these were always like really cool building blocks, to kind of help create new visions for other stories, somewhere else. So.
Tracy, when your grandfather would tell you these stories, when he would repeat them over time, did they change or did they stay consistent? He was the ultimate storyteller.
Well,
so
no, what he would do, he was a great storyteller, but would also, and of course, he was, and now as an educator, because I've done a lot of kid programs over my years, and he would let us as the recipient also kind of participate. And so you can see him in a way always starting to kind of change the story, but based on how that person, as being the kid, would actually react to it. And then now I look back thinking, yes, sometimes the stories would change, but it was in a way that he was helping kind of create a new story path for how we were reacting at the time or participating at the time to make it even better. So a lot of the war stories, the joke was in the family was the Nazis always got larger and larger groups, so, but that was pretty much it. And to me, he always kept the war stories really at a minimal, and he probably made them more lighthearted being younger, so I never really got to really hear probably more of the true realism that probably took place. Actually, I read about it now in some of the amazing books that a lot of the scholars
Well, and for Rand and Tom, so you didn't list young allies up there as potential Kirby kid gang, and Joe was involved. Joe Simon, Jack's partner, was involved. Do you guys consider young allies like a Simon and Kirby kid gang? Because I'm kind of like, they did covers, but
I had the cover in initially, and then I decided to take it out because it was scary,
yeah.
you know? So
Well,
even-
yeah, that's not, yeah, the superheroes mixed in, but if you're a bunch of kids, well, because my thing with Simon and Kirby's kid gangs, which I've always found fascinating, the early ones, and they worked together, but their last kid gang that each of them did, kind of, to me, defined what was different between Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Joe Simon's last kid gang was the Green Team, which is a bunch of very affluent teenage boys that have, $1 million and gold-plated airplanes to fly around the country, and Jack went right back to the slums for Bing Bad's a Dangerous Street. And it was, I think, kind of, not that Joe was born with a spoon in his mouth, but I think Joe had a little more affluent upbringing than Jack did. I think it
Well, I
reflected
think
in
it
their
was
work.
just giving the people what they thought they wanted.
Yeah.
Simon Kirby experience.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the Green Team was pretty interesting. That way it's kind of toned up.
Yeah, yeah. Richie Rich with friends or something.
So what we have here? Oh, we have all the kid games.
But you also continued that with animation work. There was a lot of concepts along kids games as well.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. The challenge with the animation stuff is that sometimes I'm not really sure how much of it might have been driven by writers in the studio.
It's possible, yeah.
So these are the DC National kid gangs that, with, the Boy Commandos being such a top seller.
And it's funny because they were all very different, but they all came from a similar template. There was always, a wise guy and a brainy guy and a dopey guy and a rather good-looking guy, so, right? And even one was even called Good Looks.
Yeah.
You didn't get the message.
And even like, I guess this is after World War II, right? They tried again with the Boy Explorers, with Harvey. I think there was just one issue of that, but the business was just very strange. And there were paper shortages, and comics were not being opened at the newsstands. And so things were they were struggling after World War II, as were a lot of businesses. And this is the dingbats that Jack did for one
And
of
those are 30 years apart.
Yeah, those are 30 years apart.
Yeah.
Is the Boy Commandos page is that the only art page that he drew himself in a comic?
No, but perhaps in the Golden Age.
From the Golden Age?
Yeah.
Okay, 'cause okay.
So these are some of the collections that you can get of recent collections from DC, the Kid Games. Introduction by John Morrow on the one on the right. So John, you know a lot about the Newsboy Legion, right?
Love the Newsboy Legion.
Yeah.
I didn't know who they were until they appeared in Jimmy Olsen in the 70s, and then they ran those great reprints in the backs of a few issues, and I was just like, is this the same artist? It was just so full of life and energy, and I finally collected all the Golden Age Newsboy Legion stories in torn up, tattered original copies that I picked up at this convention mostly. Some coverless or whatever, but you could still read the stories, and as long as Jack was actually working on it, even if it was just layouts, and he had, assistants filling stuff in while they were rushing to get ready to go off to World War II. It was still just fun, great work. And of course they had the Guardian, who's technically a superhero.
Yeah, that's our
character.
I love the historical aspect of like Boy Commandos, where the characters embody, the nationalities of the alliance. So it's just and the stories within are really really good as well.
Oh, quiz for the audience. Jack's wife, Rosalind Kirby, appears in one Boy Commando's story? Does anybody know how she appears and where she is? I knew you guys know. I know. Nobody got it. Tell it.
Oh, it's a story of a war aircraft, the Rosalind K. Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yes, he snuck her in there. Didn't name it, not in.
And just to be clear too, I mean, you know, the idea of a kid gang, it didn't come, you know, fully out of Jack and Joe. I mean, there were the play Dead End and the Dead End kids in plays and theater and movies existed for quite a few years before, you know, the Boy Commando.
Right, and they went through, you know, the Dead Kid being the East Side kids ultimately to its highest.
But we'll
The Bowery Boys.
we'll see when we start talking about romance. It's like, you know, Joe and Jack didn't invent romance fiction pulp on the newsstand. They made the comics version of it. So that's what they
And the Dingbats of Danger Street, compare that to the Four Guys in Welcome Back, Kotter, if you guys remember that TV show.
Oh my gosh.
That's like perfect match.
I thought for sure that at the time that the Dingbats were a Welcome Back Kotter, you know, inspired thing, but the timeline doesn't match up at all. No, it doesn't. They were, so there's tomorrow's publication that you can get that has some kid gang stuff in it. They get all the unpublished Dingbats.
Right. There one was published were there two more included issues that never saw print, but they see print in this volume. So it's a lot of fun. It also publishes a lot of romance stories that Jack did when he was trying to promote a line of actual newsstand regular magazines.
Yes.
And one was on True Divorce Tales. Everybody wants to read True Divorce Tales. And there's also this story of Black romance, and it was called Soul Love.
So
Yeah. So, you know, if you have a Jewish man in his mid-50s, you know, just trying to concoct these tales, you know, and becoming part of the era of the 70s, there was a little mismatch, but the divorce book especially is amazing. So I would read it for that.
It's amazing in what way?
Oh, okay.
Oh, the divorce, yes, no, the divorce book is amazing.
I
Yes,
think we have, you know, middle-aged couples, right, in a crisis. And I think, you know, I mean, if you're a middle-aged couple, you see it once around you, and you see what happens to relationships after 30 years. And I think they're really incisive stories. I think they carry a lot of depth. And when I finally got to read them all in one piece, I was actually saying, wow, you know, this is like stuff like this happens.
Well, and divorce was a huge, it was skyrocketing in 1970 when Jack did those. So it really was very timely. And Jack's pencil work in there, I don't think has ever been more beautiful than in those divorce books. So, but when you said it was amazing, I thought you were talking about the Black romance story that spun off, stories that spun off that, because that was amazing in a different way.
In a different way, they're kind of kitschy because there was his reflection from surrounding media. You know, when he was looking at, you know, he was trying to reflect the zeitgeist around him, and I think that True Divorce is something that seemed more personally observed than that.
I mean, they were so different than his other romance work, which, you know, middle age in those romance comics was kind of like 30. You know? And it was like, there was never divorce. There was like a lot of threat of leaving the husband early on in marriage because you didn't know how to handle money or handle your baby. But there was no divorce, so that also is super interesting.
There were no, yeah, I mean,
There was a lot of threatening of like leaving the husband or thinking, but then they always realize that they're wrong and that they need to like be better wives.
it got a rising Simon Kirby, young romance.
The first or second issue of Young Romance had a story where she was like really stressed out about her marriage, but then she wants to help him get a better job.
Right, but I don't think there were any real divorce
No, they
steps
weren't.
there
No.
at all. It's like,
No.
if somebody got divorced, they just walked.
So I'm just gonna go right to the romance since we've been talking about it. Here's some more data that Colin pulled from the database from Catalog Raisonné. So there's from 48 to 70, there were 312 romance stories that Jack worked on, 99 covers, and you can imagine how many pages that was if there was 312 stories. So he certainly had a vast experience writing and drawing romance comics.
Is it true that he invented the romance frame?
Well, he did.
Well, I mean, it depends if you ask Joe Simon or Jack Kirby, who initially came up with the idea, but they both have like the same sort of origin story, which is we were working on My Date, and I realized that like women needed comics that were more serious, and I know that women like confession magazines, and so and then we made the romance comic, and so like Joe Simon, like his version is that he came up with the idea with Kirby, and Kirby's is that he came up with the idea when he realized when they're working on My Date that they should make something more serious. So it's the same sort of origin story, but I would say. Yeah, I think they invented the romance comic, definitely. I've looked at some early publications. There's really nothing like it. They really did take the Confession magazine. In the UK also had their initial own romance comic stories that were separate from America, and they're very different. They were kind of like adapted from romance novels, and later on they sort of adopted the more American style. So.
It was a big segment of the magazine world then.
Yeah, there was a lot of newspapers actually at the time that were complaining about like, are they going to take over magazines? Are they going to take over confession magazines? And there were some writers, and I found this was like a trade magazine for writers, and they were like saying, should we also figure out how to write romance stories for romance comics because we might not have a job in confession magazines anymore. So there was like a lot of tension around it.
Yeah, and that genre was very popular in radio. There were like Mr. Anthony, people writing with their romance problems.
What's really cool is that by the 70s, newspapers started saying, like, using romance comics as the staple of like what romance entertainment should be. So it's like, oh, this movie was okay, but it would have been better as a romance comic. I think that's really cool. So they kind of came in a field that was already really popular and just kind of overtook it.
So interesting. So this is a comic, a splash that came out of the Simon & Kirby studio. I think it's Mark Meskin.
It is Mark Meskin.
Yeah, and George, probably Meskin and Russell, but Joe and Jack were in control of these comics, and so that's just something to see that was produced by them.
Oh, Nancy Hale's
I love Nancy
Hale.
Hale. Oh my God.
And she is like this great,
Yeah.
people would, write it. With
They
their
would, and they talk about how like, girls would write them in, and they didn't have a woman responding, so the men would take turns responding to it. But what's really cool is they put it in comic book format, not always, but then other romance comics really did take hold of this and started mimicking it. But Nancy Hale's my favorite, and what's unique about Nancy Hale compared to other romance publications is the other ones sort of address teenagers more, and Kirby also addressed teenagers, but they also addressed like problems that wives would have. Like one actually addressed cheating. I was like, what do you do if your husband cheats on you? And it was kind of like make sure that you're like dressing nice, taking care of the kids. That you're like you have a hobby so that you're interesting, so you don't have like a career because that's bad. Like I don't think Kirby wrote that one, but it was because it doesn't match up with him. But it was like in a later romance publication.
Really good advice.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said that.
Oh, man-hater.
I love it. I'm wearing the shirt. I have the shirt on. I love Man-Hater. I send this to my sisters a lot whenever they're mad at their people. But yeah. There's a few romance comics that had the title Man-Hater, and it was always like, I don't like men, or I use men, and then at the end, a man like kind of tricks them, and then they realize like, oh, I really do love men, and I need to get married. My my
They
personal story.
had all the sensational titles for those stories, like I was a teenage pickup, or I was a dance hall floozy, or whatever it was. And then you'd read the story and it's just like, oh, well, this wasn't that terribly
Yeah,
sensational.
There was one called,
Teenage Sex
I was in
Club.
a
Teenage Sex Club.
Club.
What that was is they went to a diner and they like kind of met up at a diner and ate diner food together, and I think one of them kissed. But then a lot of comics try to like pick up on the sort of make out parties too, and that continued into the 70s.
Yeah, my grandfather didn't tell me any of these stories.
Sit down, producer.
No, we didn't.
I like this one. There's a lot of times where they like tried to like include something that's like seems really scandalous and like weird, and I think they did it on purpose totally, but yeah.
Come on. But they're so beautifully written, though. They're such a much higher level than any of the other love genres.
Okay, so I will say that Kirby really did include some really like more serious plot lines in other romance comics. Like once other publishers took it over, it got a lot more like just kind of simple stories of like I loved him and then I made a mistake and then now we're engaged. And this one like when there's one about after World War II that was about like how there was like a youth Nazi leader that like fell in love with an American man and realized that like being a Nazi was wrong. And like there's a lot more serious stories and they dealt with a lot of class issues in these romance comics that didn't come up in
Dealt
other.
with class
Yeah.
in them, and I don't recall any other company
There's actually Hiccup.
talking about different classes and stuff like that. Thank you for your thing.
Do you know the story Different? The Simon Kirby romance story. Rand, you want to convey what that's about?
We actually did a theatrical reading of it online. You can find it on our YouTube
Oh, that's
channel.
right, that's right.
Yeah, it doesn't go explicitly use the words, but it is basically a tale of anti-Semitism in the suburbs in post-war America. Pretty
And that
great.
kind of just disappeared, like, those kind of serious stories really disappeared in the 60s for the most part.
Go back to the old world, the old country.
And, I forget what the family name is, but they angled the family name.
Whites.
They had a secret.
Was it Whites? What was it?
I forgot.
What?
I thought you.
Oh, is that the last name?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have thought that during Weiss came from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's my mother's surname is really Weiss, so.
I like the classic story of like the girl has too many men interested in her and she dates around, which actually reflected what was happening with dating culture at the time. Because after World War II, it switched. Like before that, it was girls would date a lot, and then they would find something to fit. It's like a lot of dating. It was acceptable, and then after the war, it was all about going steady and finding your future husband. And so that became very scandalous in the romance comics. But you wouldn't have found that in the earlier pulps. That's so great.
Very rare.
It's a beautiful look at Jack's pencils.
So that's your new heartthrob, eh? She sure is pretty. I'll be waiting for her when it's all over. Short-lived little romance is over. You're gonna have to wait a long time, fella. This is love. It's gonna last.
And if you're used to, or if you're, studying work with Jack Kirby, and you compare the fineness of the observation of the life drawing as compared to the superhero comics, I mean, these are well-observed figures and features. I mean, the drawing is just fine.
Oh, the twin.
That's from, the left one is from True Divorce Tales. It's a very interesting story of a wife who brings her identical twin sister who's separated from her husband into their home, and the husband starts getting confused as to who is who. Which naturally can happen,
No. I guarantee you my sister's husband knows the difference between me and my twin.
Oh, well, you speak from experience, being an identical twin. Well, that's true.
So creepy.
So cool. And these are from Soul. And some of these faces were redrawn in the DC offices, as you can tell, like the woman in the first panel. That profile is just absolutely terrible. Again, it was redrawn in the production office. So
More Sidney Poitier and Diane Carroll.
Yeah.
Jack. I put this in because this is my actual introduction to Simon Kirby romances. It was published by Eclipse, put together by Greg Theakston and Richard Howell, and it was an eye-opener for collection, black and white reprints of Simon Kirby romances. Just wonderful. Hard to find these days, but now you can maybe find these.
Yeah.
These are two Fantagraphics compilations, and this Marvel compilation came out combined with Kirby's war stories from Marvel. There's also romance comics in thing that, which that is the blue cover, which is the Kirby Museum special edition. We do not have any at the show.
Is there any difference in the?
There is no difference other than the cover.
Than the cover.
Yeah, but if you're interested in Think That Love, go to tomorrow's booth, 1116, right, John?
Let's take a look at Magic on the presentation.
It's so similar to the romance.
It is. I actually got confused when I was going through your slide lesson.
Got that portrait and the beautiful Howard Ferguson lettering, display lettering.
Yeah.
And the woman in very tragic.
Oh, these are great. Okay, yeah, those are like a mix between the crime comics, the true life crime comics, and the love confessional.
Well, you know what it was too, was I guess what happened in 47, right? So you saw the Boy Explorers comic, there were a few other things that happened. You'll see something, a brief moment if we get to it, with teen humor and funny animal humor. But the comics industry, the superheroes, they weren't a thing. Like the GIs weren't reading comics anymore, and so the comics industry was challenged. And again, like I said, distribution and paper supplies. And it wasn't until crime comics and romance comics took off where they found an audience again. And Simon Kirby did not invent crime comics. I think it was, who was that guy?
Charles Potter.
Yeah, that's it. And so he Bureau, right? Charles Bureau.
Yeah.
And so these guys, that was part of the trend, and Simon and Kirby took to it, and did some really great work.
Absolutely.
Mark Barker, 1947 or something.
Wonderful stuff.
And then we have some unfinished stuff from the
Yeah.
80s, I believe.
Look at that. I mean, look at that. Right? This is so unusual to be able to see Jack's pencil drawings. And the one on the left seems to be started to be outlined before they do the one with the brush work. And it's amazing the growth of the artist. I mean, the way he constructed, I mean, the composition and the dynamics are always there, but the sensibility of the drawing is totally different than the later Marvel and DC work. It's one of my favorite periods.
Oh, look, it's Mark Barker in the early 1970s.
Yeah, this is 30 years later.
I guess Jack liked that story. That was in the days of the mob. And there were a number of, so the first issue was published, and then it was, the second issue was produced with Royer, inking and lettering. Just beautiful work, right?
We have the hands.
Mike Royer is a beautiful inker. He's
All
like
right.
the probably the best inker there is for Jack, in my opinion. It was funny because we did a panel, Bruce and I did a panel with Mike, and we were talking about it, and I was trying to get all art schooling with Mike and make him do it and stuff. Why do you, some pages he would eat the outlines of the poem, get pens and fill them in, and some days he would just whack at it with the brush. And I said, why did you make those choices? Why did you do that differently? And Mike kind of looked at me and said, he's got this agenda, it's the spirit of the brush. Sometimes you just sit down and you just, that brush works right that day, and you can go at it, you can do things like these pages and not have to outline my pages. Sometimes the humidity, the drinking the night before, the whatever that happens with artists, you don't get that. And that's when it really hit me, what makes Mike so great for Jack. Is Jack's work is highly, highly skilled. Writers will tell you, oh, he did it all on an instinct. And no, he didn't do it on an instinct. Instinct is when you stick your hand in the fire and go, I'm burning up, I have to pull it back. That's instinct. What Jack did, he brought this incredible intelligence of drawing to it that was processed so long that it became flow. And Royer is the anchor that works for him best because he could flow with it. He wasn't caught up in. You look at Vinny's stuff and you kind of go, Vinny was doing what Vinny did. And you look at Sinnott's stuff, and Sinnott was pretty firing it up. Royer was able to duplicate Jack's flow and speed of Jack's work. Where Jack was doing 4 pages a day, Mike was inking and lettering 4 pages a day. So there's some, they were able to just get into this fugue state that's utterly, in my mind, sort of an astonishing piece of work. I love the girl's story just because you can see Jack pulling up through it. There's various shots, like the bottom right panel is clearly, he had some babe from some movie that he was referencing.
Or magazine.
A magazine somewhere. Whereas the girl in the second panel on the top is clearly a Jack Kirby woman from Superhero period with those thunder thighs.
Fabulous. One of my favorite covers. And the cover on the right is Jack. Photo cover.
I know, I remember posting that cover on the left on Facebook right after the COVID lockdown. No one knew when we were going to get out of it.
On the left, yeah.
Tomorrow.
Well, if you look closely at that police officer in that previous cover, you see how his sleeves seem kind of short. That's actually Joe Simon, and that was the only uniform they could find to fit. So Joe was a very tall guy. So.
Yeah. Some more covers.
More identical twins.
Yeah.
Trouble.
There's a lot of romance comics actually.
So on the left is a 71 magazine cover, and on the right is the new edition that included the unpublished issue 2. John, you helped out with that, right? You can see. Wonderful. This book is from the Titan Simon & Kirby Library. I think is the best of the series. It just is incredible. It's about this thick, and it's filled with Simon & Kirby crime comics, beautifully restored, beautifully printed. If you can find it,
My grandmother bought that for me.
forever. And here is the latest book from tomorrow, John.
Yeah, Simon and Kirby had their own short-lived publishing company. It was called Mainline Comics. It was in the, 1954 to 56, kind of in the wake of the whole Dr. Frederick Wortham comics caused juvenile delinquency thing and the Senate hearings on that. And so they only lasted for 2 years. The whole kind of history behind it and why it failed is in there. But they had 4 titles, and none of which were superheroes. Bullseye would be the closest, but I mean, he was a Western character. And that's going to be out in, we've got advanced copies down at our booth right now, but that'll be out in November, I believe.
Looked at romance already, and briefly wander somewhere else.
terrible problem about doing slideshows with Jack is no matter what you do, you can't get it down to fit in an hour.
Yeah. So the war comics, again, 142 stories, 67 covers. Here's a drawing that Jack did while he was in Toronto. There's a really great documentary that you can watch called Kirby at War. I think it's on Amazon Prime. Mark, it's really eye-opening and wonderful. This is Hotbox. People consider this like the best two-page story out there. I don't know, but, it's just a wonderful, wonderful story that Jack did. I don't know who else might have helped him with it, but it's a great art comic. Some more really great art there. Foxhole was a unique thing about Foxhole was that it was written and drawn, or at least written by guys who served, or people who served, so that was the tag. It was pretty cool. And, again, caught up in the business challenges of comics. Then there was Jack kind of taking the multinational kid gang, what do you call it, and making them adults and putting them in an army unit and saying, okay, it's World War II. Here's our
Kid gang that we run to kill people.
And he also did a great bunch of comics about the leaders in the 70s, BC. Some really cool art.
Yeah, a lot of times they had two-page spreads with like this infographics. So we would, and we actually sourced it back to some war books that came out in the 70s where he took those images and made it into Kirby illustration.
Yeah. So you can find these kinds of, what's that? No, that's Western. So again, there's military war comics and
We're running out of time. Let's get to the funny animal stuff.
That's what I want. I really want to get there. Westerns always.
I know, I was just saying, like, I think when we were talking about panel submissions, there's so many different facets of inspiration and different comic stories that aren't just superheroes we were even hoping, and maybe next year, to look into myths and monsters and, Jack, there was so much mythology. We all know Thor and all that, the Norse mythology was a big influence. And so there was Jewish mysticism and mythology, historical stories. We went through National Geographic. His collection of National Geographics was amazing. And so there's like so many facets, from the monster comics and space, and like he loves, Sky Masters and the Space Force. There's so many other areas that we just need another panel.
Right. Hey, I asked for 5 pounds.
Yeah, we
Gave us
can
all.
What we need is a book collection of the funny animals, the humor stuff.
Well, these two here are from My Date, and this is the kind of Archie comic called My Date that they worked on, which is when they got their inspiration from romance comics.
And they are very fun.
This is some Frontier of Insanity from the 50s. Here's some Marvel parody stuff that Jack did. Everybody loves that stretch socks argument.
No one can satirize these superheroes better than Jack. Inside Out.
Part of this is, I know this is not a superhero panel, part of what makes Jack great is he could do superheroes and there would be all these funny bits in it. There's one panel for the people where Darkseid tweets, I think it's Mark Weinreiter's notes.
Well, wait, go back to
and I'm sorry, but there's no other superhero comic where the villain who just wants to destroy the world pinches a character's nose. And his, that the phenomenal ability to bring humor in it is what makes Jack, one of the things that makes Jack great.
Right. Can you run back to those Tom Rickles covers for just a second? These are so funny. I mean, the cover on the right has that classic line. Kirby says, "Don't ask, just buy it." You know, because it's like people are like, "What the?" You know.
Hey, Randy, do you have any examples of Jack's Mexican pornographic comics? You guys know the story of that?
The masked wrestler.
Yeah, no, he was at a cartoon
Ramon.
society. Ramon de la Flores as his pen name for his career as a Mexican pornographic cartoon. That was a joke, by the way. Jack was pulling a fast one on somebody at a cartoonist meeting, and they were introducing each other, and he said, "Oh, I'm so-and-so, who are you?" And Jack said, "Hi, I'm Ramon de la Flores. I draw Mexican pornographic comics." I don't know if he ever told the guy that wasn't true, but...
Thanks, everybody. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everybody.